How's everyone doing? Hanging in? Still poop from yesterday? Oh, Councillor Lieber's back, and I think that we probably have quorum, do we? Can I see your faces? Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we do.
All right. This item is the zoning bylaw amendment for the Westboro infill study in the interim control bylaw area. We have, do you have a copy, Councillor Lieber, of the transition clause?
Can I ask Melody to send me that one more time,
Sure.
just to make sure I'm up to date, or, you know, if I can read it off the screen as well.
There was your preference.
I'll read it off the screen, it'd be great.
Okay.
And then we're going to have a presentation.
So this is a transition clause for when the rules actually take place. So whereas the report recommends zoning changes for the area bounded by Byron, Dovercourt, Golden, and Tweedsmuir resulting from the interim control bylaw study, and whereas staff have received comments from the development community wishing to add a transition clause for applications that were submitted during the time of the interim control bylaw, and whereas staff agrees that such a transition clause is appropriate, therefore be it resolved that document 2 details of recommended zoning of the report be amended by adding the following provision: amend section 9 transition of bylaw 2008-250 by adding a new subsection with provisions similar in intent to the following: no provisions of amending bylaw 2021 XXX Act to prevent the issuance of building permit for a development located in area A of schedule triple Y of zoning bylaw 2008-250 for which a completed application for site plan control, committee of adjustment approval, zoning amendment, or building permit was received or a decision was rendered by the Ontario Local Planning Appeal Tribunal by the city on or after October 9, 2018, and before the date of passing of this bylaw, and such applications may be processed under the provisions in place prior to this amendment. B, the subsection is repealed 1 year after the passing of this bylaw, and be it further resolved that no further planning notice be given pursuant to subsection 3417. Staff have let me know that they don't have any concerns that anything applicable would actually be moving forward that doesn't meet with the intent of the new zoning rules. Thanks, Chair.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. Robert Sandercock. Robert, hello, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to have a presentation, as I said, and then we will go to speakers, and we will start with Murray Chown when we start. Thank you. Go ahead, Robert.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of committee. Before I begin, I would like to very much thank the members of the working group that was involved within the Westboro infill study. That's especially to our community representatives, Eric Milligan, Gary Ludington of the Westboro Community Association, but also Murray Chown and Rosalind Hill on the development industry side. And last but certainly not least, the involvement from Councillor Lieber and his office. There has been quite a lot of work on this, and certainly acknowledge that there are still some concerns, and you'll be hearing from some of those representatives today. But the input from all of those parties has been very helpful to get us to where we are today. So with that in mind, here is our presentation. Next slide, please. So how we got here, Council, as you know, adopted an interim control bylaw in 2018 prohibiting the development of triplexes in a portion of Westboro, subject to a study of the use. In staff's view, this necessitated and represented an opportunity to review infill in the neighborhood more generally, as well as the underlying development trends that lead to those concerns. Essentially an opportunity to align zoning with those trends, as well as current official plan policy, as well as the upcoming official plan policy. Next slide. In terms of key principles, taking into consideration the new official plan currently under development, in particular, the council adopted growth management strategy, which looks for a greater proportion of new growth in existing neighborhoods, while balancing that with a need to ensure compatibility in new infill. What that means from a zoning perspective is that built form must be given greater importance than the specific number of units in each building. Presently, zoning primarily regulates on the use of the buildings, a detached being distinct from a semi-detached, being distinct from a triplex. From a zoning perspective, we believe that in the future, built form, the actual how that lands on the ground, must be given greater importance in zoning. And that's what this is going to be based on today. Next slide, please. So here we see a rough representation of the existing context in the study area. It is a mix of detached and mainly semi-detached homes, also with some multi-unit mixed in there. Next slide, please. Here is where we see what the current zoning permits. Most of this area is one zone, R3R. That's regardless of whether it's a more local tucked away street in the interior or an edge such as Byron Avenue or Churchill Avenue or any sort of major street like that. There is no regard for local context or how significant the street is. When we look at the permissions for triplexes, the R3R zone essentially permits a 3-story box up to a density of about 80 units per hectare, somewhere between 20 and 80 units per hectare overall, but generally in terms of the actual form, a 3-story box, regardless of where you are. Next slide. So what we essentially saw was necessary is something similar to the current proposal, directing higher density to major corridors and edges near and around major main streets. In this case, in the study area, Churchill Avenue and Byron Avenue are kind of the main edges and major streets within that area. When you go to local streets, there will still be density permitted up to anywhere from 35 to 100 units per hectare on local streets generally. Still permitting triplexes, permitting townhouses, but with a much more controlled built form that actually addresses existing context, character, and building massing. So not necessarily the 3-story box anymore. Next slide. So the result, as we kind of see here, as more develops, essentially more certainty as we see development go. The biggest density uplift going towards the major streets and the areas towards the edge of the neighborhood on Byron. There will still be change as you go on local streets, but it will be a much more gradual change, and you will still be able to essentially recognize those important characteristics of the neighborhood, even as that new development comes in. There is a compatibility there. Next slide. So the result is an increase in essentially both housing quantity, types of housing, and housing diversity in a manner that is overall more respectful of the existing context in the neighborhood. Next slide. So essentially, this amendment itself divides this whole study area into 4 areas. The first 2 being the most major streets, Churchill and Byron. Area C then being corner lots on local streets, as well as what we refer to as transition areas. So essentially areas not quite on the major street, but next to it. And then finally, local streets in the interior. Next slide. So this is how that would be represented essentially on a map. The blue and the red, being Churchill and Byron respectively, are the areas where highest density would be concentrated, transitioning to some density more on the orange, transitioning to the lowest level of permitted density in the yellow, the local streets. Next slide. In zoning terms, that essentially means an R4 zone on both Churchill and Byron Avenue, permitting uses such as apartment buildings, up to 4 stories on Churchill, 3 stories on Byron. In addition, no new single detached or semi-detached would be permitted on Churchill, and that's to ensure when lots are redeveloped, they actually result in higher density, given that that's where we're intending to concentrate on it. Up to 6 units permitted on corner lots and transition areas, and then local streets again, permitting triplexes, permitting townhouses, no greater than that in terms of density. So we have a proposal for a greater range of housing in Westboro, but how do we ensure that it's compatible? And here's where we propose a number of measures. Next slide. Height. So local context is key. As we said, 3 to 4 stories appropriate on those more significant streets, but when we look at the local streets in the neighborhood, they're more comprised of single homes, generally pitched roofs, as you would kind of picture when you picture your typical home. With that in mind, it's essentially proposed to limit height on local streets based on the type of roof. Pitched roofs are generally more indicative of the existing streetscape in a lot of Westboro, so a 2.5-story height permitted for flat roofs, which may be increased to 3 stories, 10 meters, where a pitched roof is used, which again fits in more with that sort of style. The thing to keep in mind on local streets is that this is a lower height than the 11-meter height that's presently permitted for triplexes in the present R3R. Next slide. The proposal will also require articulation on facades, similar to what was required in council adopted rules that were adopted last year with respect to the R4 zones and the R4 zoning review. This is to promote visual interest in infill design. Next slide. Rear yards and landscaping and trees. These were considered very key characteristics of Westboro. Residents were very loud and clear about the significant concern that infill had on existing landscaping and trees and essentially preserving those features. With that in mind, there's a couple of measures we've proposed here. First of all, a maximum building depth for lower density dwellings to limit unnecessary protrusion into those rear yard spaces, and also a minimum landscaping requirement in rear yards. This builds on a principle that we put forward in our more general low-rise infill regulations inside the Greenbelt, which were council adopted last year, the principle of landscape first. The idea that you have to ensure that there's area for landscaping before any of those other sort of features that you provide. Next slide. Parking. So generally, parking requirements do not apply to most infill in Westboro. Up to 12 units, there's no on-site parking required, but it does remain a desired feature among residents as well as many builders. So parking is still going to be permitted with infill development. The intent, though, is that it is something that must be provided only after all other needs, think of landscaping as a good example, only after all other needs are met on a site. So those principles will apply in the new zoning as well. Next slide. So put those last couple of things together. This is essentially what you get. On the left, we see what was permitted in the old R3R zone. Again, that 3-story box that I referenced, rear yard that is predominantly focused on parking. So significant impacts on the local context, significant impacts on space left over for either new trees or existing trees. If we look more on the right, we see a much more constrained build form, more consistent with what you see on a local street. Parking still permitted, but must be provided after that landscaping feature is met. If that means, for example, moving it into the building envelope, as you see in the example here, then that's what must be done. Next slide. Quick note on other yards, front yards, side yards will be standardized in each area to essentially ensure that in each area there's one set of standards regardless of the dwelling type. Where larger buildings are permitted, Churchill and Byron, that would set at a 4.5 meter setback. In local streets, that is a 6 meter setback, which is what you see in the R3R zone today. Similar thing with side yards, we are proposing to standardize them to 1.5 meters, which is typical for where apartment buildings where they are permitted. That is a slight increase in a number of dwelling types that are lower density, which allow a 1.2 meter setback. But the idea again is to standardize it based on form and less so on use. Next slide. So to put it all together, these regulations are intended to set a clear direction for where growth in Westboro is to be concentrated, the sort of build form design considerations that we want to see in support of infill, how to address context in terms of height, landscaping, and other important characteristics, and the key principles essentially that we would like to see inform future zoning in urban neighborhoods as we continue with the development of the new official plan and subsequently the new comprehensive zoning bylaw. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. That was a really good presentation. First speaker up is Murray Chown. And Murray, you're now representing the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association. You're in that role right now?
That would be correct, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
So thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. You will all have seen a letter written on behalf of the Greater Auto Home Builders, which was delivered earlier this week. I want to thank staff, and in particular Robert Sandricott and David Wise, for all of their efforts over the last 2 years or more on this exercise. I think that what is being presented to Planning Committee today is a reflection of all of their efforts and the efforts of the working committee. I think that certainly the Greater Auto Home Builders entered into this exercise with the full understanding that what was going to come out of the exercise was going to be kind of a test case in terms of where we might be headed with zoning under the new official plan, which is, as Mr. Sandricott has indicated, is intended to regulate development more on the basis of form rather than typology. That is to say, how big is the box? What does the box look like? And less about what's inside the box. And we certainly support that direction here and going forward. With respect to the details of the proposal that's before you today, the industry still has a few concerns. The increase in interior side yard setbacks from what is typically 1.2 meters for most development in this area today to 1.5 meters, which significantly impacts the buildable area on a property, which then has some impact on the potential number of units or the size of units that could be developed on that property. And one of the focuses of the new official plan going forward is try to make sure that we're accommodating larger units through intensification in these neighborhoods. The second area is with respect to the controls in the rear yard. The home builders think that we dealt with that reasonably well through infill 2. Not sure that we need to go to the lengths that are being recommended to Planning Committee today with respect to buffers in the rear yard and minimum landscaped areas in the rear yards, but we'll see how that plays out. Until we actually start to work with the zoning bylaw, we're not sure how much of a challenge that will be, but we're willing to find out. And lastly, of course, is the discussion about parking. All of the members of council in this committee who are in wards where there's significant levels of redevelopment and intensification realize that parking continues to be one of the biggest issues with every single development application or infill application in those wards. Even though the zoning bylaw doesn't require parking for development of less than 12 units, the future occupants, whether they're owners or tenants, are always looking for parking. And the community and the neighbors are always concerned about pressures on street parking with every single one of these development proposals. So, Mr. Sandricott has indicated to you that the approach taken in the recommendations before you today is kind of deal with everything else first. And if you still have room on your property to provide a parking space, then go ahead and provide a parking space. We would like the city to take a more flexible approach to this. Our letter sets out a number of options that we would like to explore with the city for providing parking in these neighborhoods as we go forward with greater levels of intensification and densification, and even more opportunities to provide parking on a site-by-site basis. And specifically, we'd like to encourage the possibility to allow for surface parking spaces, whether it's in a front yard or rear yard, on what we'd call an interim basis or as a transitional use of those lands while we evolve to a point where we truly are closer to being automotive free. We're not there yet, but rather than building garages or incorporating garages into new development, let's explore the possibility of surface parking spaces that over time could be landscaped, could be planted with trees. I think we need to keep that possibility in mind. I don't think it's going to happen here, but I certainly think we need to keep those issues and opportunities and options in mind as we move forward. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Murray. I don't see any questions. Oh, see, I say that just so people can think about it. Councillor Hughley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maria, if I may follow up on your comments about parking, I thought you were going to address my concern there. Would you agree that if we were to pick any area of the city where we could go with no parking under these conditions that are listed here in the report, that this would be the part of the city that we could do that in?
This neighborhood is certainly close to transit. There are some that are even closer. Westboro Beach would be an example. Champlain Park might be an example, and Mechanicsville, Hintonburg. It's certainly close to being a neighborhood where, certainly over time, it would be nice to think that we'll be able to develop without providing parking. We're just not there yet. The local bus service still isn't there yet.
Okay, but you see it working towards it. I'm sure Councillor Lieber will want to add to that, because I'm pretty sure he would enjoy getting rid of all the parking he can get rid of. So I'm anxious to hear his views on that part of it for this area. A lot of what was said in this report, though, I like some of the certainty that this brings to planning in other areas as well, including my own. I've got a lot of interest in this report because of the certainty that it brings with the individual streets and where we're going to build and where we're not going to build. So I'll be reaching out to staff to see how much of this we can quickly copy into other areas. So I want to congratulate you for your part in this, as well as all the staff members that did the work here. One last question that I have that I didn't hear a lot of in there was water runoff and stormwater storage. I know we want to try to protect the backyards to handle that, but has anybody done a look at the existing system to see if it can handle the system?
So, Councillor, I'm sure staff will want to answer that question at a more detailed level than myself, but at a high level, this is I'll say it's a serious concern in all areas of the city where we're proposing increased levels of densification and intensification. The Greater Ottawa Home Builders is actively discussing this with your infrastructure team, who are working on the infrastructure master plan, because we share that concern about pressures on the existing infrastructure as we increase the levels of density in all of these older neighborhoods. I don't think there's a simple answer to your question, because it's something that's staff are still investigating, but I'll certainly welcome any further comments from staff.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure if you were involved in that study or not. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll re-ask that question to staff afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hughley. Councillor Lieber.
Thanks. And Murray, I'll just ask, the proposal is not to ban parking entirely, right? There are built forms that are going to continue to have driveways. I guess the nuance would be in multi-unit buildings that it's going to be more difficult to get parking in there.
There will be many of the properties in the R4 zones where parking will in fact be prohibited.
On the multi-units, I mean, if you build a semi-detached, you're still going to have a driveway.
Actually, I haven't thought about that question as to whether the
because you want to max out the R4
is limited, is whether the prohibition on parking is limited to is a result of the use, or is simply a result of the lot size in the R4 zones. I think it's just tied to lot size regardless of use.
Okay. And then the other proposal addressing maybe Councillor Hughley's point is the porosity of the surface parking on these lots, requiring permeable pavers and such. I hope that will help with some of the stormwater, because, you know, as Westboro has intensified, we've seen a lot of stormwater running off those properties into the roads, and residents can tell you about you know, what it looks like when it rains. So I'm hoping that will help.
Agreed. You know, it's an additional cost which drives up the cost of the housing, but it is a partial solution to the problem.
Good. Vice Chair Gower, before you start, may I ask you to take over for a few minutes? I'll let you know when I get back.
Okay, absolutely. I'll have to look up the speakers list, but happy to do so.
Oh.
Murray, I read the letter from GOBA, and I just wanted a point of clarity. One of your ideas around transitional parking was off-site parking and the allowance for distinct parking lots that could serve properties that do not have on-site parking. Do you see that as the responsibility of the developer or the property owner? I just want to make sure I'm clear on what GOBA's concept for that would be.
I think it could either be a developer-initiated project or a city-initiated project at a much grander scale. The city has already done this with the parkade that they built in the Glebe on Fifth Avenue, which was funded through, I'm not even sure how it was funded, quite frankly, but a much smaller scale. Either developers or the city could go, find a small lot that's ripe for redevelopment, but maybe it could be used in a short term for a small parking area, well landscaped and everything, but to provide maybe a dozen parking spaces so that people we're not trying to squeeze the parking onto a redevelopment site, or we're not putting significant pressures on-street parking. It's something we'd like to explore.
Okay, thanks, Murray. I'm not seeing any other hands up, so thank you, Murray, for your presentation today.
Thank you very much.
Next on the speakers list is Charles Fichtner. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Charles, are you here?
Hear me?
Yes, we can.
Go okay.
Ahead. 5 minutes.
For some reason, I don't see my image there, so makes this a little more difficult. I have some slides that I wanted to show, and I wonder if those can be put up.
Yep, we can see them now.
Thank you. What I would want to draw your attention to in this is, first of all, this is an existing community. It's not a new community. It's a community in which there are many houses. Many people live there. They've invested their life savings. It's a community in which they want to live, they chose to live, and they want to continue to live. You can see those houses marked in the little white boxes. What's rather interesting is if you look at those little white boxes, you find that perhaps 15% of them are already gone. We've seen intensification at a significant scale. And if you look at the boxes, those are the boxes of the size of the houses on the lot, not the size of what could be built on the lot under the current rules. So the intensification that has already taken place has put a massive amount of pressure already on the community. What this will do is it will effectively say on the blue areas, every house in that area becomes so valuable that it becomes torn down. So it puts pressure on all of those people to move. 4 stories, no limit to the number of units. And if you look behind the Churchill Avenue, you see both on Highcroft and Elm Grove. On the streets behind, you see the transition zone, which allows higher density again. So what this does is, in effect, puts a massive pressure on the community to change dramatically. Could I have the next slide, please? The provincial policy statement provides some guidance as to how things should be happening in existing communities compared to new communities. And it says there should be increased density where this can be accommodated, taking into account existing building stock. What we are seeing here, in fact, is no recognition of the existing building stock. It's an attempt to basically, at a blanket level, to look at the area and say, what could we possibly squeeze into this area? So I think this proposal, which has been rejected by all of the community representatives who were part of the working group and separately as their community associations, this is not reflecting what can be accommodated. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I'm going to jump around. That's not the order I would have preferred, but let's just do this one anyway. Churchill Avenue, no, go back, please. Can you go back to the, oh yeah, thank you. On this for Churchill Avenue, it says it's also proposed to prohibit development of detached and semi-detached dwellings along the street. This is a real attack on people's right to own their property. So it's a dramatic change. It says your property is not something you can decide what to do. It's not saying here's the zoning to which you can build. It's saying it's the zoning to which you must build. So people's ability to control their property is decreased. Next page, please. This is an excerpt from one of the patents for this land, the conditions under which it was originally granted by the Crown. It was an absolute purchase, granted, sold, alien conveyed, and assured to those forever with their control. And next slide, please. And if you look at the Conveyancing Act in the province, it says that persons are entitled to the quiet enjoyment, which means undisturbed, unmolested, it's not sound simply, and the freedom from encumbrances. What this would do is attack that provision of freedom from encumbrances by putting a massive encumbrance on those properties. And that is a step, I think, that goes way too far in terms of denying community people their right, and it won't stop at this community. Next slide, please.
1 minute.
So if we look now at the role of council, it's to represent the public and consider the well-being of the city. The public rejects this. The public view is not represented. So I ask you in your duties in council to actually make sure the public is interested and is represented and not the broader issues. Next slide.
It appears to be.
Oh, sorry, that's it. So what I would say is, in summary, that this proposal violates the rights of owners, it damages the community, it forces people to move, it consists effectively of a bulldoze, replace, push out the people and bring in new buildings. And it's incompatible with the duty of councillors under the Municipal Act. It's incompatible with the provisions in which properties were granted initially by the province and then the conveyance through the deed. The community rejects it. And I ask you as members of council to reject this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fichtner. I'm not seeing any hands up from committee members. Thank you for your presentation. The next speaker is Eric Milligan. Mr. Milligan, are you here?
I am.
All right, welcome. We can hear you and we can see you, and you have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm Eric Milligan. I live on Edison Avenue. My wife and I administer an email list that reaches more than 260 households in Westboro, and our flyer distribution network reaches 100% of the households in the interim control bylaw area. We started the list as a way to communicate with and mobilize our neighbors when those infill developments, those triplexes that prompted the interim control bylaw were first proposed. I want to assure members of the planning committee that, broadly speaking, the residents of Westboro, we fully recognize and we accept the need for intensification. We understand that the city needs to increase the housing stock to meet the projected population growth. And we agree that intensification that is focused in the more inner urban areas makes sense. We do not agree that the proposed zoning changes in this report, however, are appropriate or necessary. In fairness, there are some good new requirements here that do attempt to respond to the concerns of Westboro residents. There's no question about that. But the rezoning provisions go too far in authorizing what would be a massive increase in intensification in a neighborhood that is simply not equipped to deal with that degree of change. And we are concerned that it will radically transform Westboro from a place that we know that we make our home into something that we will no longer recognize. There's an understandable tendency, at least among those of us that are not experts in this area, when we're considering the technical changes of zoning provisions, which are pretty hard to understand in the first place, to think about how they would apply to a single piece of property. For example, these provisions would allow developers to tear down an existing family home on a street in Westboro, Inner Street, sever the property into 2 lots of 10 meters width, which is a reduction, replace that home with triplexes totaling 6 units, or long semis with secondary units totaling 8 units. Now, even considered in isolation, that's a massive increase in intensification, the ratio of increase on just one piece of property. If you then think, what would be the situation if a developer did it, say, on 2 or 3 lots in the same block, or maybe more? Those aren't theoretical possibilities. This is a situation that we've had to deal with, and these are concerns that we've tried to express over and over again. It's the cumulative impact of the massively increased intensification that will be enabled by these requirements that is causing so much stress for residents of Westboro, and I believe, I really mean stress. And if, as the city planners expect and hope, that this rezoning approach proposed for Westboro is eventually going to be extended as the model for rezoning in other urban areas of the city that are targeted as the focus for intensification, we think the result will be far more consequential, and the risk to all the targeted neighborhoods, not just Westboro, will be far greater. So we feel that the provisions go too far. They're not going to enable a gentle or even a moderated approach to intensification in Westboro. They don't strike the right balance between the legitimate need to intensify and the obligation to mitigate the potential harm to our neighborhood. There needs to be a balance, but this is not the right balance. So we urge councilors to reject the proposals in this report and instruct the city's very capable planning staff, who we work very well with, frankly, to scale back the degree of intensification that would result, and to prepare a detailed, multifaceted urban planning analysis of the potential impacts would result under different planning scenarios. There are a whole bunch of questions regarding the need for this, how it would play out across the city at these levels of maximum intensification, and the consequences that it would unleash that are not addressed in the report. And so we don't have the information to properly assess the implications. Let the interim control bylaw and the moratorium on triplexes expire. Give us 6 months to try to find a better approach. We will continue to act in good faith to help the city design a more reasonable path for intensification in the neighborhood. Through the Westboro Community Association, we work constructively with city planners and representatives of the infill developers to fashion more reasonable zoning provisions. And in the interim, we'd work constructively with any developer who was willing to pursue intensification that respects the unique characteristics of our neighborhood. We've always been willing to do that. And
Councillor Lieber has a question for you, Mr. Milligan.
Thanks. And Eric, thank you very much for being here. And thank you very much for the work that you've done over the past couple of years. You have absolutely, and your neighbors and folks with whom you are engaged, approach this in an open-minded and generous way. And I know, you've learned a lot about planning as well through the whole process. A couple of questions, I guess, for you. I mean, this is not a wholesale upzoning to an R4 neighborhood like Hintonburg, for example. What this set of rules would do is essentially normalize the existing pattern of development in which triplexes, semi-detached, single-family homes are allowed, that have been granted as a rubber stamp every 2 weeks at the Committee of Adjustment, but it would make those buildings now clearly required to have some features that mitigate the impacts of the kind of Wild West intensification that we've been having so far. The buildings that would be allowed, for the most part, except for some of those corner lots, in some cases would be smaller in the case of a triplex, because they would have to be lower. If they have a flat roof, they'd only be allowed to have a couple of stories as opposed to 3 stories if they have a peaked roof. And so the built form doesn't change radically, and I would suggest is going to evolve in a more sensitive way than it has been to date. What are the harms that you are seeing associated that I can really grasp onto? And we've had this conversation multiple times, I know. It sounds to me oftentimes like it is a rejection of more people as opposed to rejection of a built form. And I want to give you every opportunity here to talk about the harms that you see.
Sure. Perhaps the most critical planning assumption that underlies this report is that the level of intensification isn't what's important. It's a question of form. We have never accepted that as valid. We don't think that actually accords with a sound, holistic approach to urban planning, because the consequences of increased intensification beyond a reasonable limit that the community can and the neighborhood can accommodate triggers all sorts of other factors that cannot effectively be addressed through zoning changes, even those focused on form. David taught me this, David Wise taught me this, that zoning is a blunt instrument to accomplish the much broader and complex objectives of urban planning. So we believe that these broader impacts are not being sufficiently considered and addressed. So where will all the cars be parked? We know that with many more people, there will be many more cars. We're actually constraining the ability to park on the property. So we believe they're going to go on the streets. Well, if you ever recognize the streets in Westboro, you could barely get down them now. Most of them don't have sidewalks. Kids ride their bikes to school every day. I'm not going to go on and on about that. I'm saying that, in fact, the consequences of more units, more people, more vehicles means issues in terms of road congestion, just the actual character of the neighborhood, and safety. Garbage bins. Just think about what it will look like if, and it's very important to realize that these lots are going to get severed. So you're looking at the requirement for a single lot, but you're taking virtually every lot that is up for redevelopment in the area. Think of it being divided to multiply everything by 2. Multiply all those units by 2. So where do all the garbage bins go on garbage day? It's a significant change in that. Many of our streets, certainly my street, apparently is considered to be rural. I don't know, it was 7 years ago or so. Edison was rebuilt, but no storm sewers were put into our area because it was considered to be a rural street. So we have rivers of runoff going down. How will those streets, which are narrow and tree-lined and already constrained with cars and trucks, handle the increased traffic? We don't believe the physical infrastructure is likely to be sufficient to handle the level of intensification that is being contemplated. And we know that it's kind of, well, we'll approve the zoning changes now and we'll worry about that later. And I've seen that play out in earlier discussions of the development in the east of Ottawa. That doesn't seem to be a sound approach to making decisions that will then trigger levels of intensification that we may not be able to handle. There are, I know the city because David told me this. It knows exactly what lots, the age of the homes on all the lots. It has a very good ability to project the rate at which these homes will be torn down, likely torn down and replaced with infills. And it's entirely possible to do scenario plannings where you look at different levels of intensification and then take a look at these kind of impacts, and I've only mentioned a few, and do an assessment under different assumptions about the level of intensification. The thing that we're pretty certain of is this will trigger developers to go to the maximum because number one, they can, and because number two, as the value of these properties for redevelopment increases, they will have to do that in order to have economic infill developments. And so while it looks as if a variety of build types will be allowed, we think in fact, the dynamics of this will go to the max, and we think that will go on an accelerated basis because of the way the market behaves.
You're on mute, Councillor Lieber.
Thanks, Eric. I wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to put those concerns on the table before we moved on. I mean, I'll have some comments with respect to how I view some of those questions, obviously, and a couple of those are areas where you and I are absolutely aligned, particularly with respect to storm sewers and the rural nature of the streets that are in Westboro right now. But I do appreciate your time, Eric. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and no more questions from our committee. We have a final speaker on this item. That's Gary Ludington, representing the Westboro Community Association. Gary, are you with us? Looking for Gary on our screen here.
He's here.
Oh. Okay, I've unmuted. Somebody unmuted me.
We can hear you now, Gary. Welcome, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. We actually strongly urge the members of committee to think about what is being proposed here. I think it was mentioned by Eric that the impact upon the rest of the urban community with what's being proposed here could be quite great and detrimental to the fabric of all our neighborhoods. I'm on the board of directors of the Westboro Community Association and became a member of the working group formed as a result of the interim control bylaw. And at the end of that, sometime, I think it was December of this past year, we submitted comments to Mr. Sandercott, which basically said that the Westboro Community Association couldn't support the proposed zoning changes except for the addition of townhouses, as the changes proposed will destroy the character of our neighborhood, and eventually we'll only be able to find Westboro in local history books in the library. It will have disappeared. In our view, the plan is a source of deep concern. In the corridors where the heaviest intensification is to occur, there is no limit on the number of units while in the corner lots, where one residential or neighborhood street intersects another, the transition areas allow up to 8 units. There was mention of long semis. So take a typical single family lot, it's severed into 2, and there's actually 2 times 8 semis. And where does all the parking go? That was a question, that's been a question, and it's still a question. One would have hoped that the new official plan would have been completed, since the existing OP tended to treat all of the neighborhoods in the same way, regardless of context. The official plan is supposed to set out high-level policies and aspirations and protect our neighborhoods. The zoning bylaws set out how those aspirations are to be interpreted within individual neighborhoods or collections of neighborhoods. An overlay that was applied to the urban area at the time of amalgamation promoted homogenization and was disastrous for communities. Later, the mature neighborhoods overlay was developed to correct the abuses that resulted from this one-size-fits-all overlay. The mature neighborhood overlay recognizes the fact that preservation of green space and trees is necessary, and community characters is deeply meaningful to those who live or aspire to live in the community. And I just want to mention as a factor that trees being a concern and green space being a concern. We've had lots that have been severed to build 2 single-family homes or 2 semi-detached, where as many as 17 trees have been eliminated. And we could get nothing to happen. We could not get the city to stop that. 17 trees decimated because somebody wanted to build another unit. For example, the provisions on average front yard setback and rear yard setback is based on a lot depths and limits on driveway widths speak to community character and context. And Eric mentioned this. Where are all of the cars going to park? Yes, there may be a driveway, but probably in all likelihood, there will be no driveway because the lots are, they're going to go to the Committee of Adjustment, just regardless of what's in the new zoning. And they're going to seek a minor variance, and that minor variance will give them what they want. It has to date. The intended reduction in building footprints and driveways speaks to the need for room in every neighborhood for green space and trees. The tree canopy in Westboro has been decimated over the past half dozen or so years, and we know it will be a long time before it returns, if at all. We appreciate the work done by the city and our councillor in trying to standardize infill in our neighborhood. However, the proposed changes do not reflect our input, and we would ask that this report be set aside until new zoning can be better guided by a new OP. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you, Vice Chair Gower, for filling in for me. Councillor Lieber has a question for you, Gary. Councillor Lieber?
Thanks. And Gary, always good to hear from you, and thank you very much for the work that you've put into this effort. Dare I say it was actually fun. Let's walk around and talk about planning. But Gary, I guess the big question that I have for you is, you're speaking to the desire to preserve Westboro. Is Westboro changing today? Is the Westboro, is Westboro already changing?
Yes.
I think, and I guess I figured that would be the answer you're giving me. And the question is, what do we do about that? And, I'll have comments again as I wrap up. I think it's important to recognize that builders currently are taking advantage of zoning rules that allow singles, semi-detached, semi-detached with secondary dwelling units, triplexes, but they're doing so in an environment that is regulated largely only by the whim of the Committee of Adjustment. And even where the community wins a battle at the Committee of Adjustment, the LPAT virtually never sustains them. I guess, Gary, the difference that you and I are likely to continue to have on this is whether or not we should try to put in place zoning that protects the intent of the zoning bylaw as it was largely created decades ago, or whether we can have zoning that recognizes that the area is going to intensify and to try to mitigate the effects of that intensification that is inevitable. Obviously, I'm supporting the staff report, so I'm interested in regulating it. But as you said, for a decade, 15 years now, Westboro has been changing with little community control over what that looks like.
Well, there's a couple of things that have been mentioned in the presentation from staff, and I'm not faulting staff to any great degree because we worked well with staff over this process over the last 1.5 to 2 years. Yeah. But reference was made to a 3-story box, which was their definition of a triplex. I submitted drawings, model drawings to this process that were triplexes, but looked like single family homes. They took up a little bit more of the lot. It's not a case of the lot would be severed in two and there would be 2 square boxes. These were, and yet our input into what a triplex could look like and how it could fit within the community and how it could be welcomed within the community, not in this report. And
no, and
why,
I'll ask staff about that for sure. Sorry, Gary, go ahead.
All that would mean, as far as we were concerned, was you regulate the zoning so that this is what is permitted as a triplex, not something. But anyway,
Yeah, no, and it's, you know, the compromise I think that staff have arrived at is to say you can build triplexes. You can even sever the lot, but the triplex can only be 8.5 meters tall if it has a flat roof. So it looks much more like a single family home. That's a 2.5 story building. Because, and you know, I guess I'm asking residents to consider the reason why we're here is because there was an application made to sever a lot and build 2 3-story triplexes with flat roofs. And so the purpose of this exercise was to ask, is that suitable? And I think what staff have done is said, no, that's not an appropriate built form for Westboro. Here is a more sensitive built form for Westboro while still allowing it. Well, Charles spoke to the public interest duty that councillors have. And one of the public interests that councillors around this table have is, how are we going to address the housing crisis? How are we going to address climate change? How are we going to mitigate the impact of urban sprawl, and somehow reconcile that with the need to preserve what people love about their neighborhoods? So, and I'm sorry, the chair has given me more than enough latitude to have a discussion with you instead of pose questions. Gary, thank you very much. I've got some questions for staff.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I didn't want to interrupt Councillor Lieber. Gary is our last delegation, so we are going to go to questions of staff. Does anyone besides Councillor Lieber want to speak to this item? Because if not, then he can have his wrap up at the same time. Before you do that, though, I just want to say, oh, Councillor Hubley does. I just want questions of staff, Councillor Hubley.
Just have one question to do with stormwater management that I had asked earlier, if staff could answer that one. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Who's going to take that? Robert? Oh, David? Hi, David.
Yeah, if I could just give Councillor Herbie just to refresh my memory on the exact question, and I'd be happy to answer that.
Sure. I was just wondering, with the added density into the area that this plan will bring, I'm wondering if anything was done to check the capacity of both the storm and the sanitary systems to make sure that we have capacity for that density.
Yeah, Madam Chair, that's actually something that the infrastructure group does on a regular basis. They're actually they're doing it constantly. We know that there has been stormwater issues within this neighborhood. There continues to be stormwater issues with respect to ponding and flooding, and it's sort of a basis of the existing nature of the grading on that. There are areas that we are very well aware of where, in fact, the ponding actually is on the property rather than on the street, just as a function of where the grades are. And so the infrastructure group does have a plan that they're working on, and that is also a component of part of the infrastructure master plan that is also being developed right now concurrently with the new official plan. So they are on top of that. One of the things that is interesting when you talk about new development and alleviating some of these concerns is new development actually has the opportunity to fix a number of these issues. For example, with respect to these areas in Westboro where you are seeing that reverse drainage, where water is flowing back onto the properties and actually pooling into rear yards, what the infrastructure group has started doing is they've started requesting developers to put in a rear yard catch basin. And by putting in that rear yard catch basin, they're able to solve a flooding issue, or so not a flooding issue, a ponding issue for many lots, and to be able to pull that forward. Now that is right now a request, but there is certainly movement towards that potentially being a little bit more than a request as we move forward. Plus also within the zoning bylaws, we're also going to be looking at more firmer regulations with respect to permeable surfaces and on-site stormwater management when we move forward. So all that to say that infrastructure group right now does do those assessments for sanitary, storm, and water. This area does have that capacity. And in fact, actually development can provide the means to improve those situations where there are concerns.
So I just want to be very clear here, David. I know that staff review this on an ongoing basis to make sure that the existing community has capacity, and they try to do these fixes and quite innovative fixes at times too, to provide some capacity, such as catch basin in the back and recessed parks and things like that. But my question here is, are they looking at the projected density numbers and checking the system to those numbers? Not the
Yeah, and Madam Chair, that is indeed part of the infrastructure master plan work that's been going with respect to the projections from the numbers from the approved growth management strategy. Those are being portioned down, and the infrastructure master plan is reviewing the capacity and the ability for the system to accommodate all of those necessary things. Those are currently underway right now.
When is it expected to be completed so that the ward councillor and his residents will have some confidence before the density is at it that there's not going to be water in the basements?
Well, the infrastructure plan and the infrastructure group is always available to answer those questions. So certainly that we can provide and have that infrastructure group reach out to the councillor's office. But I can say on a citywide basis, again, that infrastructure master plan is happening right now concurrently with the new official plan.
Okay, I'll look for the ward councillor's comments and his wrap up on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Hubley. And before I go to Councillor Lieber, because you'll ask your questions and then do your wrap up, I just wanted to say that when I read this report on the weekend, so this is for staff, for Councillor Lieber and all the people that have participated in pulling this all together. I think it's excellent. As I told him on the weekend, it gives me hope, which I really didn't have much of, that we have a chance at increasing intensification. If we can take this plan into neighborhoods where we have no density now, you know, the streets that where we have opposition. And of course, we have that in some of our suburban areas. This wouldn't be a good fit for suburbia as we know it today. Maybe some decade it will, but I just think that you've done an excellent job. And as I said, it caused me, as busy as we were with and believe me, we were on the official plan stuff. I took the time to call him because I was that impressed. So thank you for the great work that you've done. And thanks for the attention and the commitment of the community. And thank you, Murray, because I know that you were here today representing GOBA, but I know that you played a significant role in this as well. Over to you, Councillor Lieber.
Thanks, Chair. And I think one of the, I don't have a lot of questions for staff. I mean, obviously, this has been a long process. I love the opportunity that taking 2 years, thanks to the pandemic and the special exceptions that we were given on the interim control bylaw, to extend that by a year, gave us a lot of back and forth on this. And I had the opportunity to go out to the community frequently with communications about how it was going. But one of the big worries, of course, is that we can put all of these new gates on intensification and create clear rules, and the Committee of Adjustment is simply going to change it all. And you heard that raised clearly by Gary. You know, one of the things that I am seeking out of the Westboro infill study is I want to know what the rules are so that it's not this fight every 2 weeks in front of the Committee of Adjustment. What does the Committee of Adjustment look like, and to what extent are they likely to start varying some of the good things that you've done here?
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I would say, just to kind of give a bit of, I think, background, certainly Committee of Adjustment has been a big concern raised by the community, as Mr. Ludington alluded to. If we were to look at these sort of stuff approved through Committee of Adjustment now, a lot of the variances we see approved are not necessarily pertinent to the building or to the actual site. Typically, the most common variances that you see to infill are to lot width or lot area. So the size of the lot not necessarily anything to do with the building. A lot of the zoning regulations that we are introducing, there's intended to be very clear intent as to what we're looking for on an infill site, both in terms of its built form, so that's we see through the adjusted height provisions as well as adjusted provisions in rear yard, but also in features and things like landscaping, which as we know is a very important characteristic there. The report obviously goes into great detail in terms of direction to the Committee of Adjustment when variances do come in, and property owner has the right under the Planning Act to apply for it. So it's not going to say they won't come in, but there's going to be much more clear direction when those variances do come in on what sort of site elements they're actually impacting, and consequently, it'll be much easier to provide clearer direction on whether that still actually maintains an appropriate infill as we intended it.
If Mr. Chown comes with one of his clients to the Committee of Adjustment to say the buildable area of our development is not what we need, and it's because the side yard setback is too much for us. We need a half meter on the side yard in order to make this a better project. What is the committee likely to say?
I mean, without knowing the details of the hypothetical proposal, I mean, they're going to have to review it on its merits, but I would suspect that the applicant is going to have to provide justification on that reduced setback based on the context, first of all. What sort of pattern do we see around it? How does it impact that pattern? And also, I mean, in the case of your specific example of a side yard, does it maintain things like access to the rear yard, which is one of the features, which is one of the intents behind requiring a side yard?
Okay, I think one of the things that I'm pleased with in this new zoning regime is that you're bringing over some of the language in terms of guidance to the Committee of Adjustment that you've put into the most recent infill rules, and I think the R4 as well. So hopefully the committee is watching that closely. Colleagues, I won't take up a huge amount of your time. I am asking you to support this. Infill has been in Westboro for 15 to 20 years, and it is relentless. And we don't really know what the rules are because the zoning doesn't meet the official plan. And we need zoning that takes into account the intensification that our new official plan is going to require in ways that are easy for people to understand what the limits are. And this zoning puts in place some limits that aren't currently in place right now. I think the lowering of things like triplexes down to 8.5 meters, allowing for more if you have a peaked roof, is a really important change. Requiring permeable driveway spaces is a really important change. And then emphasizing the room for landscaping is absolutely critical. One of the tensions that you've heard residents raise is that by focusing on landscaping instead of parking, it is very possible that we might see more people trying to park in the street. And I'm going to suggest that in Westboro, that problem is going to be an issue for some years to come, but it is a transitional issue. To Councillor Hughley's point, it is extremely viable to rent an apartment in a triplex, a low-rise, ground-oriented triplex in Westboro, and not have a car. There are very few neighborhoods in which it is any easier than this. The parking on the street right across Kitchissippi Ward is getting more and more challenged all the time. You saw recently the downtown councilors wrote to the developers to say, look, when people move in, tell them there is no parking and you're going to be challenged to find street parking. I believe that we can fill units with people who don't have cars in neighborhoods like Westboro and Westboro Beach and Hintonburg that are close to transit, that are walkable to multiple grocery stores, where the amenities are all on the main street. Yes, I expect that there are going to be flashpoints and pressures in the years to come. But over time, those are going to become less and less. When people call my office to say, I've moved into an apartment, there's no street parking, can you help me? We are forced to tell them no. And people do move. But that's not to say that these units can't be filled with people who are able to live without that car. If you need to have a car in Westboro, you're going to buy a semi-detached. You're going to move into a building that has lots of parking, and lots of those are still being built. And otherwise, you know, I think the opportunity here is to put some clear rules around welcoming more people to Westboro. To be able to say this incredible neighborhood in Ottawa is not just accessible to the very richest of us, that there is an opportunity for more people to be able to enjoy that proximity to Westboro Beach and to Richmond Road and to the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway Park. We have the opportunity to welcome more people in a way that is sensitive. I'm excited to see what staff do with the Westboro infill study in terms of going elsewhere across the city in the comprehensive zoning review. I expect that we will see that this is a bit of a template because we have to intensify our mature neighborhoods. And I would suggest that the proposals by staff are a sensitive compromise between the need to develop the city sustainably and still maintain what people love about their neighborhood. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. And thank you, everybody that participated. So, committee zoning bylaw amendment for sorry, I'm on the wrong one. I'm trying to move the day forward, I guess. The zoning bylaw amendment for the Westboro infill study, interim control bylaw area. Is that carried? Oh, sorry, hang on. I've got the Lieber transition clause that he introduced before. Is this one carried?
Carried.
Carried. And on the report as amended? Carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. All right. The next one is also in Kitchissippi. It's the zoning bylaw amendment for 1705 Carling Avenue. Before we start, though, I see Doug James. Are you still there, Doug? Hi. I just want to say, everybody, that Leanne's back. You'll see her on Hollywood Squares in front of us. But I wanted to take the opportunity before we start this, because who knows when the next time will come along. Hi, Leanne. Welcome back. Doug, you've done an amazing job. It's been great working with you. You filled in for how many months is it now? It seems like a long time.
It's a year
as the director. How long?
Since just over a year.
Yeah. So, it's been, we certainly have been as busy as ever, and there's been a real mix of things to take care of. And I know that my colleagues around the table, not just the planning committee, have really appreciated your leadership. So I wanted to say that publicly. Thank you very much. And as I said, welcome back, Leanne. You're very big shoes to fill. So, I think that that's also important to say that while the two of you are on the screen together, it won't be for the last time, that's for sure. So let's get on with 1705. You're welcome. Let's get on with 1705.
Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Let's get on with 1705 Carling Avenue. We have a motion from Councillor Lieber to update the zoning map. And that's what it does. Did you, Councillor Lieber, you're not, your mic isn't on.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, so this replaces the zonings, some of the details that are in the existing report. We've been working with the developer and with the Residents Legal Counsel over the past couple of weeks to try to shrink wrap the zoning to give residents comfort that passing the zoning today won't be carte blanche to doing something much different and denser. So whereas report the 1705 recommends zoning changes to the lands known municipally as 1705 Carling Avenue to permit a 22-story residential high-rise building. And whereas the location and zoning map in document 1 does not include the reference to the existing R10 zoning designation, and whereas staff have been made aware of a desire by the councillor in the community to place further zoning limits on the heights and setbacks of the buildings being proposed as to restrict the development to what is shown in the associated site plan, and whereas the heights included in the newly created zoning schedule shall not restrict permitted projections such as balconies and mechanical penthouses, whereas to provide more clarity and to ensure alignment with the corresponding site plan control application for this property, staff proposed to add a zoning schedule to be listed as document 8 of this report, and therefore be it resolved the planning committee approve the following changes to the staff report. Replace document 1 of the report with a revised location and zoning map referencing the existing R10 zoning designation listed as appendix 1 to this motion. Add a new document 8 to the report listed as appendix 2. Amend document 2 to introduce the new zoning schedule. Amend document 2 a bunch of sections as these will instead be clearly referenced in document 8. Amend document 2 to include the provision permitted projections listed in section 6465 are not subject to the height limits identified on SYYY in column 5. Amend document 2 to replace any reference of AM10 to AM10 XXX SYYY-H. Be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to section 34 of the Planning Act. And I do just want to thank the planner for creating some shrink-wrapped zoning so that residents have the assurance that this won't be developed to any greater density than what they are actually proposing to us. Thank you very much to Claridge for that.
Thank you. And John Bernier is your planner.
Yeah,
Hi,
thank
John.
you, John, for your work on that. That's been a lot of discussion over the past couple of weeks.
Okay, well, I know how much work you've done on this too, Councillor Lieber, because we've had more than one conversation, if not 2 or 3. Next up is Christy Ross. Well, our first up, sorry, on this item is Christy Ross. She's the barrister and solicitor for the residents group. Christy, thank you for your submission in advance. Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, super. Thank you very much, Chair Harder. So good afternoon to both you and members of Planning Committee. My name is Christy Ross, and I think as Councillor Lieber just noted, my firm has been retained by a group of residents who live adjacent to the project site. And I have sort of submitted a letter. Appendix 1 sort of outlines all of those persons who I'm offering comments on today. So members of the group have submitted some comments to the city, and some of them are making some oral comments with respect to stormwater and servicing. And there has been sort of a lot of sort of early opposition to this project, but I'm really grateful for the work that I've been able to do through Councillor Lieber, through John Bernier, and through Claridge as well to make some changes. And so the purpose of my comments today are really to focus on the introduction of some mitigation measures to ensure that the intensification proceeds, but in a sensitive manner, and that it reduces any impacts to the abutting residential zones. So one of the most significant concerns that the residents had about this proposal was related to the zoning. So the motion that was just read in by Councillor Lieber addresses those concerns, and I think provides the certainty that the group was looking for sort of on a going forward basis. So just to reiterate, we and the residents group support that. We just want to note one thing, possibly for future clarification from the city. We note that the zoning schedule shows some minimum side yard setbacks, and that the site plan shows greater side yard setbacks for a portion of the west side. So that's the side that's adjacent to the residential, seniors residential home. And we would just like to see confirmation that those setbacks are indeed minimums, and that those in the final site plan will be followed. Second, the residents group is requesting formal protection and maintenance of the hedge that runs around the rear lot line of the subject lands in Tilbury Avenue, including its replacement if damaged during construction and post-construction, as part of the future site plan agreement. That hedge is significant and historic, and I think offers an excellent sort of buffer zone, and sort of is one of the measures that will sort of make this, intensification, density, higher height, fit better, fit within the community. So the community is looking for some sort of some direction from planning committee and from staff that that will be something that will be maintained on a going forward basis. Third, along the same lines, the community is asking for the installation of a solid privacy fence both on the east and west sides of the property, and more specifically, where the subject lands abut an existing residential land use, the fence should be, in our submission, 3 meters in height to provide backyard privacy. So that is sort of applicable on the west side vis-a-vis the seniors residence and the proposed park, which is going to be added at the back of this site. And it's our submissions that that's consistent with section 9 and 11 of fencing bylaw. And then on the east side, where the tower abuts the adjacent low-rise apartment dwellings. And then the sort of the fourth confirmation and direction to planning staff that my clients are seeking is a confirmation that the site plan, which was included as document 4 of the staff report, will be replaced with an updated site plan, which removes the Tilbury vehicular access point. And that's consistent with the text of the staff report, which notes the only access for vehicles is from Carling Avenue, and that sort of access point would be shut. So it's our understanding that Clearidge Homes agrees in principle with the above noted modifications. And once again, we're just looking for confirmation that this will be moving forward. In addition to those 4 points, the residents group is also seeking some additional modifications. The first would be an increase in the side yard setback at the rear portion of the seniors residence to comply with the 7.5 performance standards in the AM10 zone. So there's the portion at the back that's closest to sort of the adjacent backyards is approximately 0.7 meters out of compliance. So the residents group are asking for that just to be shifted over. So not any change to density, not any change to anything else, but just a shift, just to provide a little bit more breathing room. In addition, part of the geotechnical report spoke to sort of pre and post construction assessments of properties proximate to the site, but didn't provide sort of any sort of clarity on the radius of that. And I understand that, future testing and it needs to be done in order to achieve that. But what I have done sort of on behalf of the residents group is included at appendix 2 of my letter, a list of homes that are very close and in direct proximity to the subject lands. And we would ask that those be included at a minimum in a pre and post construction assessment. And that largely relates to sort of the fill and the land in question. It's sort of backfill, unstable soil, there's some weedy clay, there's been some flooding issues, there's been some sinkholes that have been formed. So there's I think a concern within the community that construction could exacerbate that. And they just want to make sure there's a record in place to measure that and then obviously rectify any problems that arise. And
Thank
then
you.
Is
Did
that
you say
time?
what? That's the time, Melody?
Yes.
Okay, well, perfect. Those are my submissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I didn't hear, Melody, whether you had said time or 1 minute when you
Sorry.
spoke. So that's why I was just trying to count in my head. So anyway, thank you, Christy, for coming out. Councillor Lieber has a question for you.
Just to ask Christy, you talked about pre and post. Were there any other final requests that you had?
There was one minor one just with respect to surface parking. I've noted and the residents have noted that most of the on-site surface parking is closer to the high-rise development and not proximate to the seniors residence. And just with my own mother in a seniors residence, I know that there are older visitors. So perhaps that could be looked at the site plan process, and some of that can be reallocated to the seniors residence. There's sort of like that concern on site, and then there is sort of an additional concern about parking, which we've been discussing today a lot about, will there be excess parking in the community if there's not parking beside the seniors residence?
Yeah, I think the request around ensuring that the parking on site is optimal is in order to ensure that people use it rather than park in the neighborhood behind. If they find the parking is too inconvenient on site, they'll park on Tilbury or one of the other side streets and create parking pressures. Perfect. Thank you, Christy. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Nick Simmons. You have a few slides for us as well. Hi, Nick.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have a single slide that was sent to Melody yesterday. We can go to the next one, and that's it.
Okay,
So I just need to
it's
adjust
your 5 minutes whenever you're ready to go.
Okay, just need to get my notes. Okay, members of Planning Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I understand I only have 5 minutes, which is 300 seconds, which incidentally represents less than half a second for each person that signed a petition requesting that the 1705 Carling development be amended to ensure that it is in keeping with this mature neighborhood. As, after all, we just heard from city planners in the Westboro infill study that context matters. I wasn't sure if I was going to make this submission to committee. Perhaps it was due to COVID fatigue, time of the year, winter blues, or perhaps the feeling of disillusionment that nothing I could say or do would matter. Planning committee is comprised of smart people. But let's be honest with each other. I know, and you know, that the planning process in this city is broken. If history is correct, the planning committee will vote for this development regardless of what is said or the information put in front of you, then all of this is simply due process and the hundreds of hours of community effort will have been wasted. But then I realized I wanted one more push, as residents have invested too many hours on this file to simply throw things away. I'm willing to give up my time for the good of the community to assist those whose voices cannot be heard, as they are too busy caring for elderly relatives, or working, or educating their children. Indeed, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a pitchfork waving NIMBY, but rather a member of the community who understands what democracy means and knows that to give in and to acquiesce to those with more influence is not and never will be an option. You're likely under the impression that the impacted residents do not want the development. This is not true. Planner Bernier compressed 64 pages of community commentary provided to him into 8 well-spaced pages in his planning report. But unfortunately, he squeezed a little too hard, and he didn't get the chance to tell you that we have told the city many, many times that, quote, we would like to reiterate that we are not against development, but instead take the position that the proposal as it currently stands is not appropriately scaled, sized, or contributes to the overall community, end of quote. Yet the planning report before you doesn't say this. The plans presented by the developer also ignore the residents' comments. City bylaws, they cast aside multiple stipulations set out by the province and brush off recommendations from the Urban Design Review Panel. I think we should all be concerned about this. Allowing the development to proceed as it stands is based on erroneous positions. For example, an aspirational, unfunded stop for a trolley bus does not constitute a rapid transit station. Furthermore, the city has insisted upon a park, which is not wanted by the developer or residents, as there are multiple amenities of this nature within minutes walk of this location. Perhaps the most worrying concern that others will put on record is the poor soil conditions. Leader clay and marshland do not bode well for such a large, dense development, particularly as the builder wants to drain storm and wastewater down narrow, aged infrastructure on Tilbury into an area previously known as coal swamp. Again, a topic that was raised in the Westboro infill item agenda. Last year, this committee rejected a proposed development on Innis Road, one that has striking similarities to the one under consideration today. I urge you to follow this precedent and consider the win-win-win suggestion that I submitted to you and Claridge, which suggests that the developer adds additional height to their proposed towers at Nielsen Dairy in exchange for reducing the height at 1705 Carling. But this still permits the developer to build, sell, and rent many, many properties, and it allows the city to intensify in brownfield sites. In other words, a win-win-win for all. Councillors, please break the cycle and allow all parties to see that fairness can prevail. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons, and thank you for all of your effort. I just wanted to say that I didn't acknowledge how many people had also sent in a written submission. Appreciate that. Okay, so our next speaker up is Laura Lunn. Laura, are you here?
I am here.
Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Madam Chair and Planning Committee, who oversee and provides direction and insight into planning and development. I want to share with you that I live in this neighborhood and request that the rezoning or enveloping of residential land into commercial land on the north side of this lot not occur. The lot is a cleared slate, and this lot is already deeper than any other commercial lot in the area. The developer happened to purchase 2 lots, one commercial and one residential R10. The lots happen to abut. Considering the context, the proposed zoning amendments, they are not justified and set a precedent requiring hefty consideration. The main arterial street development is welcomed, as Nick said, and the revitalization of Carling Avenue is welcomed, but changes recommended could be avoided with diligent planning, limiting the key deterrents for the residents living at ground level, and potentially for the risks for the city and the developer. We look forward to a plan for Carling Avenue and are willing to contribute to a vision as to how this main arterial road could be envisaged rather than a piecemeal project, development by development. The development before us is on the arterial Main Street with all the considerations that Main Street development brings, but I recommend that the committee not introduce the principle of rezoning residential to commercial land, especially bringing in the elements of a Main Street commercial land right into an established neighborhood. There is no need nor justification to rezone this. There's ample square footage, there's ample easements, and we ask that the rear lot line of the AM10 lot be the defining strategy, not the rear lot line on Tilbury, which is right into the residential lands. The committee agrees to extend, if this committee agrees to extend commercial properties like this onto Tilbury or into a residential street, can we look forward to this trend of having other residential lots in an established neighborhood being rezoned commercial? The external review panel spoke at length as to how this is a landmark property and will be setting the tone for future development. Please maintain the commercial properties on the main street and close to the arterial main road as intended, and retain the residential nature of a mature established neighborhood behind to the north and to the west. As the lot AM10 is extending Carling to Tilbury in this proposal, it provides for a mass and scale of development away from the arterial Main Street for infrastructures linking to old 1950 city infrastructures, as Nick commented, built on rubble dumped into the Highland Park Basin from the Queensway development. Carling Avenue is on a ridge, not inside the basin, and falls into a different land structure and infrastructure, so risks for all of us, the city and residents and the developer, are reduced. Other considerations with linking Main Street developments deep into the residential established neighborhood is potentially more traffic and neighborhood parking, as staff and guests, primarily of the retirement home and tower, will be looking for free parking as there is on-fee parking in this development. more security risks. And we have already seen that when during demolition, the whole Tilbury to Carling Avenue was opened, and the risk and break-ins in the residential neighborhood increased dramatically.
1 minute.
Thank you. In this proposed development, the buildings on the site plan creep northwards and dominate the residential ground level neighborhood homes. And they do not shape and sculpt as recommended by the independent review panel. We request the planning committee be forward thinking about this development of Carling Avenue and find ways and means of development to balance needs. I can continue, but we're coming to the end. I will look forward to the support of this committee and their due process and thought. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. I see no hands raised, but thank you for coming out today. Next up, we have the applicant, Vincent Deneme, Neil Malhotra, Kirsten Nish, and Nick Sutherland. I'm sure you're not all speaking, but let me know if you are. Who is Kirsten, you're going to be the lead?
Yes, so we have prepared a presentation if you'd like to see that today, or we're just also ready to answer any questions.
I'm going to suggest that a site plan is probably in order to throw up on screen.
Sure. So in our presentation, the site plan is shown on page 6.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Kirsten Nitra. I'm a senior planner with FO10, and today with me I have Nick Sutherland with FO10 as well. And the ownership team from Claridge, Neil Malhotra and Vincent Deneme are available for any questions as well. So today we're here to consider the zoning bylaw amendment application for 1705 Carling. As most people know, this is the site of the former Webb Hotel and Rose Bowl Steakhouse. This site is approximately 8,900 square meters, so that's almost a hectare or 2.2 acres in size. It is a through lot with frontage on Carling through to Tilbury Avenue to the north. And that, as we mentioned, and as we've heard today, to the north, we have the Highland Park neighborhood, which is a mixture of R1 zoning, which is typically single detached, and R3 zoning, so permitting up to triplex development. So Carling Avenue, as we know in the official plan, is designated as an arterial main street. Arterial main streets are permitted to consider heights higher than 9 stories when in close proximity, so within 400 meters walking distance of a planned rapid transit station. As per Schedule D of the official plan, there is a planned rapid station to the east at Carling and Clyde. It's about 100 meters walking distance. And further to that proximity, when considering greater heights, we must consider community amenity being provided, as well as appropriate transition to neighborhoods. So through this application, the ownership team has worked with Councillor Lieber and city staff to determine a community amenity, which will be provided as part and parcel of the site plan control application approval. And through this, we've also determined and examined the site in the context and determined that, in our opinion, there is appropriate transition provided. As you can see somewhat on it is a little bit hard to tell, but on the site plan for on the building on the top, so that's the west building, that's the 9-story retirement home that's proposed. The closest point to the rear lot line is 35 meters. And then we do have Tilbury Avenue, which is another 20-meter wide right-of-way. So when considering transition and looking at that distance, we're looking at 55 meters away from the closest residential dwelling property or residential property line. And for the proposed 22 residential tower on the south, or sorry, on the bottom of your screen here, which is actually on the east of the property, that increases to approximately 45 meters to the rear property line. So looking at about 65 meters from the rear transition. So when considering appropriate transition, we did look at this and feel that it is appropriate. There's sufficient space and distance to provide that transition from the front of Carling, along the frontage of Carling all the way to the residential development to the rear. So in summary, we believe this is appropriate. It meets the official plan policies for higher heights on arterial main street, and we welcome any questions you have. Oh, sorry, I was also going to say there is a parkland dedication there at the corner as well as part of this development.
Would you like to just point out where that is?
So that is in the, on your screen, that would be in the top right-hand corner that's shaded in gray. So that's approximately 900 meters, square meters. And as part of the community amenity, funds will be provided to provide some basic landscaping, fencing, pathway connection, et cetera, as phase 1. And then the city would look to public consultation for phase 2 in the future.
Thank you. We do have a couple of committee members that are asking questions. We'll start with Councillor Brockington.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you talk about the access that is being debated in the community off of Tilbury? Is this a requirement? Sorry, is this a requirement by the city, or is this something that your client has pushed for?
No, so through the review, and perhaps John Bernier may also chime in, there's been a lot of people working on this. It was requested through the review. The city's transportation review group did request this access, but through consultation, Councillor Lieber, has put that to the community and understands that's not something the community wants to see. And so as part of the community amenity that will be provided for the site plan control application approval, there will be funds directed to traffic calming as well as improvements at that intersection with Cole Avenue.
But the exit onto Tilbury remains?
No, sorry, no, that's been taken off the table.
Excellent, okay.
Yeah.
I'm just looking on Google Maps. There's a house it looks like on the property at the north end that fronts Tilbury. Is that gonna go?
Yes, that will be demolished.
Okay, fair enough. What were the major recommendations from the UDRP not incorporated in your plan?
So the UDRP had made a suggestion to reorient the buildings entirely, to have them basically along the entire frontage of Carling for one building and then the second building behind it. But from an urban design perspective, as the site is north-south facing, that would have shadow impacts on the interior between those two buildings. It would also disrupt from a vehicular perspective, just the ease of access throughout the site. So as this building, as the 9-story building is a retirement home, it's important that there is a clear vehicular entrance and drop-off point, very close to the frontage of the building instead of, at the rear of the building, et cetera, so that we can clearly see from Carling Avenue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all my questions for you. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you. Councillor Lieber?
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to take a look at some of the things that Ms. Ross was asking about, and just make sure that I've got some buy-in from the developer here. I think we've already talked about changing some of the side yard setbacks. The developer has said no, and I'm not pushing that. But there is the question of the hedge. I'm wondering, Melody, can you put the site plan back up again? Slide 6 of that deck. There is, sorry, I wish I had cursor control. There is a hedge that runs from the east to the midpoint. This is along the back, along Tilbury. There's a large mature hedge that will run along Tilbury up until the park starts. My understanding is that the developer is keeping that part of the hedge, but I'm just looking for the commitment that we can build into site plan that the hedge will also be maintained, for the as close to in perpetuity as possible. Is that a site plan condition that you'd be willing to accept when we get there?
I think this has been an ongoing conversation, and we understand the importance of that. I would invite either Vincent or Neil to make that commitment, but looking at the latest landscape plan, which is still just being finalized as we speak, it does show that on that landscape plan, that existing hedge as being maintained.
So for those, if folks don't know, Tilbury comes in from Churchill, you'll see that Tilbury stops, and then there's a footpath that goes to where Tilbury continues, so traffic can't go through there. So the length of that section before the break would be hedged, and the folks who live on the north side of Tilbury facing the development would still be looking at hedge. There was a question of privacy fence along the east and west corners. And when we get to site plan, I'm looking for a commitment that privacy fence would be put in. Is that something you can commit to?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we've actually met in the landscape plan today to include the fencing on the west side that was requested, but if the east side is being requested as well, we're amendable to that. And the hedge as well, we're going to do whatever we can to preserve that section and protect it and maintain it in perpetuity. If we have to get like an arborist or something engaged to do that, we're willing to do so.
Okay. The site plan, so the zoning schedule, I believe, misses a little bit of an indent on the west side setback from the property line. So I'm by council, I may ask for some language in the report that sets out that little bit extra there. There is the question of pre and post construction survey. I don't actually have the full regulations. Are you going to be blasting here, or are you going to be digging?
We're going to be blasting. Like the rock's only about 1.5 meters deep, and so our blasting contractor usually gets a consulting engineer to do the surveys for them on our behalf. And these records get kept for over 7 years, and I'm not sure what the radius is exactly, but those houses that Mrs. Ross mentioned will probably be captured in that radius, so it shouldn't be an issue.
I see Mr. Bernier was thinking of jumping in on that.
Yeah, so this will be a condition through site plan, and the radius for these types of surveys is 75 meters.
75, perfect. So that's going to capture virtually everything that is on that list then. And then one other question for you is with respect to the surface parking. Through the course of site plan, do you foresee that there might be an opportunity to make that more optimal so that people have easy access to the retirement home, to visiting the folks who are in the tower, so that they are not tempted to park on side streets around?
We've looked at this in a million different ways, and the plans have changed in a million different ways, and this is the best design that we've come up with. We'll keep looking at it, and maybe we can look at reallocating the visitor to some for the retirement home, but I don't see the layout changing. It's what you don't see on the plan is all the infrastructure, the fire routes that you need, the amenity spaces that you need, the soft landscaping. So all these things kind of dictate this design.
Okay. And then I know this site plan is relatively new, but I'll be asking John by the time we get to a vote at this on this at council to make sure that, you know, this most recent site plan is the one that accompanies the materials that the developer is beholden to it. Nope, those are my questions. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, well, thank you, Councillor Lieber. You might as well go into wrap up now. I don't see anybody else asking any questions.
You know, I'll keep it brief. I am supportive of this tower. When you take a look at the buffer that is possible with including a new park before you get to the rear wall of either of these structures, it is a very significant buffer to Tilbury. You know, this is not untypical of what you'll see up and down Carling Avenue. Carling Avenue, some of the height here is justified because of the proximity to a transportation corridor like Carling Avenue, and some of the application materials speak to the eventual surface rail that will go down Carling. I am not naive. I don't believe that surface rail is going to be on Carling anytime soon. We have a lot of other light rail things that we need to do first. But I do believe that a lot of the folks who move into this building are going to have excellent access to buses, and I also believe that OC Transpo will have a relatively relatively easy time boosting bus service on a justifiable basis if they need to. All of Carling Avenue is getting more and more developed. We have bus priority lanes that are going to be going in. So I think this kind of density is justified on Carling with a very large number of people able to take advantage of public transit in order to be able to get to the LRT a little further down Carling Avenue. For those who are cyclists as well, they are able to get out of the building. They'll be able to exit through the park, get onto low speed streets and take advantage of some of the great cycling infrastructure we have on Churchill. So I think this is an appropriate density for a main arterial road like Carling Avenue. And it's not atypical of what we see on Carling Avenue in other areas that are proximate to R1 homes.
Thank you. That's it, Councillor Lieber? Thank you for all your work on this and for everyone. Thank you to the applicant who contributed funding towards solutions that Councillor Lieber and the community worked really hard with our city planning department, John Bernier, to bring forward. So on the zoning bylaw amendment for 1705 Carling Avenue, is that carried?
Carried.
Thanks. Okay. Oh, yes, sorry.
Thank you.
You see, when the report goes on and as long as some of them are, I forgot. The vice chair, not the vice chair, Councillor Lieber did move a technical motion to adjust to update the zoning map at the beginning. Is the zoning map update carried?
Carried.
And is the report as amended carried?
Carried.
Thank you. All right, next up is development charge complaint, 500 Preston Street in Councillor McKinney's ward. And we have Richard Ash as the manager of permit approvals, and Richard would like to just introduce it. Are you there, Richard?
I'm here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
If you would just introduce it, and then we have Philip Osterhout, probably didn't say that correctly, Martin Chenier and John Smith here to speak on behalf of the applicant. I think they are. Yes, they are.
Okay.
Go ahead, Richard.
So thank you, Madam Chair. So what we have before us today is a complaint from the owner with regards to the assessment of development charges for 500 Preston Street. And the applicant puts forth a number of points where they felt that there was not proper representation on behalf of staff to the issues at hand, and it's staff's recommendation that these representations are not accurate, and that we would be looking to have the development charges assessed as they were on April the 4th.
Thank you. So now we'll go right to our speakers list, which is Philip. Philip, how do you say your name? How do you pronounce it?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's Osterhout.
Osterhout. Well, you're up first. Would you like to go ahead, sir? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of committee, for your time. As the committee is aware, the basis of this complaint is that 500 Preston was entitled to a transitional rate under the DC bylaw if it obtained a building permit by March 31st, 2020. In March 2020, Mr. Chenier, on behalf of 500 Preston, contacted the city, advising that he intended to obtain a building permit and that he wanted to do so in advance of March 31st in order to avoid the increase of fees that was scheduled to occur on April 1st. In response to that email, city staff advised Mr. Chenier that the DC rate increase had been postponed until the fall, and therefore there was no rush to obtain the permit. In that same email, staff advised that DCs would be payable in the amount of $4,371,255.50. Now, relying on that assurance, the permit was not obtained on March 31st, but instead was issued on April 4th, after the DCs had been increased. And as a result, 500 Preston was assessed an additional $577,000. Now, the building permit that was issued on April 4th was a full and unconditional building permit. And I want to emphasize that point in response to the suggestion that the same permit would not have been available to 500 Preston had it sought to obtain it on March 31st. No new information was provided to the city between April 1st and April 4th. Therefore, there's no reason at law why the same permit could not have been issued on the 31st. Now, on March 25th, Building Code Services staff sent a number of emails to Mr. Chenier, which have now been provided to the committee, confirming that they were satisfied with the information that had been provided, such that they would be willing to proceed with a permit, and that the tech clerk would contact Mr. Chenier when the permit was available for pickup. It was on the basis of that same information then, when the province imposed the April 4th deadline for issuing building permits, that the city was able to issue the building permit. And in fact, as noted, issued the building permit without any conditions. So the only reason that the building permit was issued on April 4th and not on March 31st was that the urgency of the March 31st deadline had disappeared, as everyone was operating on the understanding that DCs would not be increased on April 1st. That assurance that staff provided, we submit, was a misapplication of the bylaw. And given that 500 Preston relied on that assurance to its detriment, we submit that it's entitled to a refund under the Act. I do have Mr. Chenier here with me, but subject to any questions from the committee, those are my submissions.
And you have that in writing?
I beg your pardon, Madam Chair.
Do you have that in writing?
Which? The emails circulated
Yes.
on March 25th were provided to the committee in our letter of yesterday's date.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Smith, do you want to say anything?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think Mr. Osterhout sort of summarized the issue at hand with respect to the device that was provided to Mr. Chenier vis-a-vis the increase in fees for the DCs not occurring as was scheduled on April 1st, but actually occurring in the fall. But I think the other thing at issue, and I think this is where there was some back and forth email as well, was related to a matter of a record of site condition. And there was some issue that was identified in early March with respect to an RSC. And on March 25th, there was indication provided that the matters with respect to the RSC were pretty well dealt with, and there was only one outstanding matter, and that was with respect to groundwater monitoring. And on that basis, emails were received from Building Code Services that a conditional permit could in fact be issued on that understanding. And I think that's where Mr. Osterholt had indicated nothing changed between March 21st and April 4th. March 25th, there was an indication of the potential for a conditional permit to be issued, whereas in fact on April 4th, a full building permit was issued with nothing having happened in the intervening time that would have suggested that a building permit could not have been issued prior to April 1st. So it was on the reliance that the fees would not increase until the fall of 2020, that the urgency in picking up the permit diminished. And that urgency was then again resurrected as a result of the province indicating that it was going to be putting a freeze on construction sites if building permits had not been issued. But the conditions in place on April 4th were exactly the same conditions in place on March 25th, which would have allowed for a permit to have been issued prior to April 1st.
Okay, thank you. We could go back to Richard Ash right now, but I am going to go first of all to Councillor Lieber. Councillor Lieber?
Yeah, I've got some significant sympathy here for the builder. The email says the fee increase has been postponed until the fall, so that may provide a little relief. Did the company follow up on that? There's a bunch of, it's been postponed, that may provide a little relief. Was there any follow-up to nail that down?
I'll let Mr. Oosterhout, or if Martin Chenier is on the line, he was the one that was actually directly involved in the discussions with Building Code Services staff and the ongoing back and forth on the email. So he was intimately part of the discussions that were ongoing at that time and would have a much better sense in terms of what was transpiring in terms of the understandings that were had relative to the messaging that was being exchanged via emails.
So, Mr. Chenier?
Yeah, so to say that I follow up to get more information on the fact that these charges were going to be actual, I did not, because my previous ask to staff was to confirm the amounts for the DC charge. And that's when I got the email and also indicating that there was an urgency to get all of this completed by April 1st. That's when I got a response saying, these are the amounts to $4.3 million in DCs. And by the way, just like you, Councillor Lieber, just indicated, DCs had been, or the increment, I don't have the paperwork in me, so I'm just going by memory, but the increase in fees was being postponed to the fall, and therefore that would provide a little relief. So my understanding from all this information was that the April 1st deadline was not a deadline anymore. And furthermore, I got some more emails that day from Terry Hunt explaining the process for how it was going to work from now on in order to pick up a building permit. So I believe that based on this information that was circulated to the people on the email, everybody kind of let their guard down on this.
Yeah, the word may in there, that may provide a little relief, is unclear. Mr. Mark, do you have any advice for us? It looks like the staff recommendation is to deny this, but when I see that may provide a little relief, that seems to, I think a reasonable person might assume that, oh, I don't have to worry about this.
Madam Chair, a couple of things. There is, in my reading of the documentation, including the subsequent package that Mr. Oosterhout provided yesterday, staff never say the building permit's going to be issued. There is no unequivocal statement stating that a permit will be issued in the correspondence. A conditional permit is just that. It is a conditional permit. There is no entitlement to a conditional permit. It is at the discretion of the chief building official. We were in an extraordinary situation, as I believe members of the committee will recall, as all of us will recall, last March. And in order to allow the development industry, the building industry, to keep moving forward, it is true, staff issued, and I think Mr. Ash may know the number, I don't, they issued a significant number of permits. And I think the day of the week is important. On Saturday, April the 4th, staff were taking extraordinary steps in order to allow the construction industry to continue to proceed. And therefore, they took the extraordinary step of issuing an unconditional permit, even though the record of site condition had not been provided. In the ordinary course, they would have either waited until the record of site condition came in, or they would have issued a conditional building permit. But again, I repeat, there is no entitlement. You cannot require, as an applicant, the chief building official to issue a conditional building permit. Thus, as of April 1, when the transitional rate ended, there was not an entitlement to a building permit. And you have the staff recommendation before you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
I think it was 180 some, wasn't it, Richard, that were issued?
Yes, that's correct.
It was busy.
It was
Yeah,
busy.
It was a record for sure, and I know that I know why. I mean, we wanted very much to keep our economy going. We were unique, I think, in the way that we handled planning and moving forward, and I give you credit for that for sure. I guess for me, the issue. Well, I'll go ahead. So yeah, I see other hands now. Councillor Gower.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm looking for some help here from the proponents here. I want to make sure I'm looking in the right place because I'm trying to find this email about the increase in the fall. And I have a 14-page letter that was circulated from Mr. Osterhout to council or to committee yesterday. Where can I find a copy of that email? Because I didn't see that specific note. You have it in the preamble summary, but I didn't see the email itself.
Madam Chair, if I may assist, I don't have it in front of me, but it was actually in the initial package, which is, I believe, document 2 to the report.
Ah, okay. I will consult that. Thank you, Mr. Mark.
Well, consult it fast if you need that information, because the next one with their hand up is Martin Chenier, but that's not the way we go, Martin.
Oh, okay.
Around here,
Oh.
but let's just give Councillor Gower a chance to look at that, unless anybody has the ability to get it quickly to share. And the anybody, of course, would be the superstar of Canadian municipal government meetings, Melody Duffany.
Well, while I'm looking for that, I could listen to Mr. Mark, but if we reject this, is there any other avenue that this developer could take, or is this sort of the final recourse in requesting for a review?
No, Madam Chair. If this course goes to council after committee makes its recommendation, and then depending on the outcome of council, the owner has the right to appeal to the local planning appeal tribunal.
Okay, and I have found that email now.
It's on the screen. I told you, superstar Melody Duffany.
Well, I wonder what staff intended when they wrote that email to the applicants. The fee increase has been postponed until the fall, so that may provide a little relief, because I think there's obviously misunderstanding of what that meant, and it'd be interesting to know what the context was behind that. What was that referring to?
Maybe, Madam Chair, it's Richard Ash. Maybe I could speak to that in a little bit more detail. Yes, as the applicant states, there was a lot of correspondence from late March heading into the April 1st date, and there was back and forth correspondence. What staff, and I'll readily admit that there's obviously some confusion here, but that staff were stating in this email, and why they were saying a little relief was that council had endorsed the indexing be pushed back to the fall, and the development charges had two pieces that were expiring and coming into play at the same time, which is quite extraordinary. But we had the transition rates that were being removed on March 31st. And then we also had an indexing that was going to occur on April 1st. So when staff was saying that, it may provide a little relief, that was basically stating that, the partial relief, that the actual increase in fees were being pushed back. And that's what they were speaking to. They said that the fee increase, the other one was not, as we would call it, an increase, but rather an ending of a transition rate. So there were two components. And so unfortunately, as Mr. Chenier says, there was no follow-up if whether or not there was some confusion on that statement, but staff made it clear that these were the fees that were owing at that time, but that was before the increase. And as Mr. Mark says, and as we say in our report, there was never a mention that the permit was ready to be issued. And I can speak to more issues with regards to that whether a permit or not was actually even ready to be issued, which I'm alluding that it wasn't, that the RSC was not filed, and I can speak to that separately.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's just I'm reading through the documentation again, and I don't see anywhere where staff said, April 1st date is not a hard deadline, or April 1st is not a date that we have to be concerned about. Like, there's never indication in any emails from staff that April 1st was some kind of a not a necessary deadline like that. So I can understand that the email may have been confusing to the applicant, but I don't think the April 1st deadline was ever in question in terms of a qualifying date for getting the building permit. Is that, well, I'll leave it at that. That's my assessment of the email exchanges.
Thank you. Councillor Tierney?
Great, thank you very much. My questions are to staff. Knowing how many of these were issued, first of all, have we actually run into this with any of the other applications? Any kind of communication issue or anything of a similar nature? And second, have we had to go back and backtrack and make changes on other ones? Look, when you have an avalanche through, nobody can fault staff. We're in a crazy time, but I'm also reading it like Councillor Gower. I'm having some difficulty with this one. Can maybe Tim Mark could speak to that.
So, Madam Chair, this is the only one. And the deadline for appealing this would have long ago expired. So there cannot be any more related to what happened on March 31st at this point in time. This is the only one.
Okay, so we shouldn't expect an avalanche of other people coming to the plate, regardless of what decision we make today.
They have lost their right to appeal to the I believe it's a 90-day deadline, Madam Chair.
Okay, good. Because we've done some things this term of council I've never seen before, where we've gone against the staff on certain things. About we refunded that one individual about their property. We've done a few different things, and I think there's always a good part of recognizing that, at the same time being responsible to the taxpayer and ensuring this isn't a greater issue. So I'm very satisfied with that. And I'll wait for the rest of the debate. I'm kind of torn on this one myself, and we'll see what the rest of the discussion takes place. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Brockington.
Madam Chair, can we ask staff directly or just the delegate right now?
Well, let's say, is everybody finished asking questions of the delegation? Yes, okay, let's go to staff directly.
So my question is this, we have professional staff that vets the complaint and they go through all the documentation and they produce a report and they come before us. So we have professionals that have analyzed this. Our job is to hear the complainant's case today and try and make a decision based on the materials we have before us. I'm inclined to uphold the staff recommendation. However, if my colleagues have doubt that there was inconsistent messaging which led the applicant to make decisions, then Mr. Mark, are we able to modify your recommendation and say, listen, we want to admit we were 20% wrong or 25% wrong, and we're going to meet somewhere in the middle where we're not going to approve a full refund, but we potentially believe that there was some unclear communications from the city which could have led to decisions being made, and therefore we want to give you a partial refund. Is that possible?
The Act, Madam Chair, the Act speaks to the interpretation of the bylaw as opposed to, I'm going to phrase it as assessment of liability, if you will. And as one is interpreting the bylaw, the expectation would be that one would go where that interpretation leads you. Staff have provided their interpretation. The owner has provided its. And because that's the approach that's given to us by the statute, it is much more of a, I'm going to say a light switch, Madam Chair, than something that might happen in civil litigation.
Okay, we're either all in or all out. So colleagues, I have nothing else to add. I like I said, I'm inclined to support staff's recommendation. I've heard loud and clear from the proponent's representation that they believe potentially the message was confusing or misleading. I'll let everyone vote the way they want, but all this to say, I'm going to uphold the staff recommendation in my own vote and acknowledge that there could potentially have been better communications on this matter, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I can. It's Richard. It's Richard.
Oh, thanks, Richard.
Yeah, I just don't want to get, I don't want to get too far down the issue of, you know, the email that was sent from staff regarding the amount of fees that were due. I don't see that, and I have a difference of opinion. But the other piece of the puzzle that is critical here is the requirement for the record of site condition, and that's a legal requirement based in the building code that is not under dispute. And as we said in our report, the record of site condition was not resolved. The applicant makes comment that they were working under the assumption that the building permit was being prepared for issuance, when in fact the record of site condition was requested on March 25th, and any other reports or documents that could be used to make a determination. And we received that document on March 31st, according to Mr. Oosterhout's report, which we agreed to that claim, and that staff were looking into the issue as whether or not some risk management could be taken on. And we weren't in that position. Then with the extraordinary circumstances we had, and with trying to put some goodwill and good faith to the industry, we quickly, and as Mr. Mark and others have said, we quickly assembled on the Friday afternoon to try and walk through this and make sure that we thought we had the right, with the information we had at hand, we could make the right decision. We consulted with planning, we consulted with our engineering department, and we made that determination late Friday that we would issue the permit on the Saturday. And, you know, I think staff acted in an amazing manner, to be honest, under extenuating circumstances and an extraordinary time. So I'm quite proud of what staff did that day to try and get permits out, but I want it to be really clear that, you know, there was no right to that permit at that time.
Right. And thank you for that. And we're all very, very proud. Like I said, it's a record number of applications. It was a phenomenal work. Councillor Gower has a couple of questions, I think. Councillor Gower?
Well, I do. I'm struggling because I feel like if I had another hour to read through the documents again, I can make a much better decision. I've heard some new information from staff and some that gives some different context to this. And I'm tempted to vote yes to uphold staff, but reconsider my vote at council. But I don't think that's particularly helpful either. And I'm wondering procedurally, do we have an option to send no decision to council today? Or would it make more sense to defer this to the next committee meeting and give everybody a chance to review and confer with Mr. Mark on legal questions, go over the timelines? I feel like I'm rushing into a decision right now, and I'm worried I'm going to make the wrong one.
So are you moving deferral?
I think that may be the best option at this deferral. We have a meeting in 2 weeks, I think.
Or, well, we do on the 25th, but let me just ask a question of Mr. Mark. Mr. Mark, what is the, because someone else asked me this one, what is the opportunity for council, for committee to not make a decision on this and just have it go to council, which would be on the 24th?
Madam Chair, I'm going to permit myself, this is normally something that would be done by the city clerk, but I'm going to permit myself to render an opinion to the Committee on Governance. I think it's fair for council to look to its committees to provide their, I'm going to say their thoughts, I'm trying to avoid the use of the word recommendation, to provide their thoughts on a matter to it. So of the two options the Vice Chair identified from a governance, which is one is sending it forward with no recommendation, which you can do, or deferring it until the next meeting and making a recommendation at that time. From a governance perspective, I think deferring it to the next meeting of Planning Committee and providing a recommendation at the time is the preferable option, because then that gives council the benefit of the recommendation that committee ultimately makes.
Yeah, and personally, I'm not comfortable. I mean, I certainly believe what you said, Mr. Ash. I have no doubt of that too. I think it's the, you know, the one of where the, aside from the site plan being ready or whatever, I mean, maybe the site plan wasn't ready because they didn't think it was coming from the fall. I would have done better due diligence on that myself if I was building a tower of this size, an application of this size. I would certainly know more, and I would know exactly all of this information. So I don't know if anyone wants to move a deferral or not, and we just vote on it today.
If Glenn moves it, I'm supporting him for sure.
I'll move to defer to our next Planning Committee meeting.
Okay, so that's before us, a deferral of 500 Preston, the development charge complaint to the Planning Committee meeting of I almost said September, what a dreamer, February the 25th. So many things going through my mind right now about vaccinations and promises from people that we'll all have our vaccinations by then, and just maybe we won't be here. We might be in Florida or something like that. Who knows? Anyways, we have a deferral on the floor. And so on the deferral?
Madam Chair, this is a deferral to the next Planning Committee
Yes,
meeting.
on the 25th.
Noted.
Is it carried?
Oh, I have my hand up, Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I thought it still said Gower there.
Okay.
Go ahead,
No.
Councillor Hubley.
I just want to share with my colleagues, I'm ready to vote in support of the staff recommendation here. I don't particularly need deferral. I think we have enough information. And I think Mr. Ash did a very good job of explaining to us the circumstances around this. So, you know, I think it's an opportunity for us to show some leadership here and support of our staff for the work that they do, and support the recommendation today and not defer.
Okay, thank you. So yays and nays then. Melody, do you want to call them out, please? I don't have the list.
Sure. So on deferral, Councillor Dudas?
Yes.
Councillor Sutz?
Yes.
Councillor Tierney?
Yes.
Councillor Lieber?
No.
Councillor Brockington?
Yes.
Councillor Cloutier?
No.
Councillor Kitts?
Yes.
Councillor Moffat? Councillor Hubely?
No.
Vice Chair Gower?
Yes.
Chair Harder?
No.
That's a tie.
No, it's not.
Do you not?
No, I have 6. So let's look at the screen. Councillor Sudds, I mean, not Councillor Dudas, I think was first.
Madam Chair, we have to go with what the clerk says, don't we?
No, she's not a clerk. She's our committee coordinator.
Or coordinator.
And you know, I can do the math too.
I may have recorded wrong. Could you call back your votes to be chair?
I didn't write their names down. I just did the count. So just who was the first one that you started with?
Councillor Dudas.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Is she still here? Oh, there you are. Councillor Dudas?
I supported deferral, yes.
And who was next?
Councillor Sudds.
Yes.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Lieber.
No.
No.
Councillor
Right.
Brockington.
Yes.
Councillor Cloutier.
No.
Councillor Kitts.
Yes.
Councillor Hubely.
No. Take 2 swipes at staff today, I guess.
Vice Chair Gower.
Yes.
And there was my mistake. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that's not necessary, Councillor Hubely. But thank you, everybody, for your attention. I know it's been a crazy time for us all.
Madam Chair, what's the result of the deferral?
The result is it's deferred until the planning committee meeting, and I trust that anybody that had any questions, I think Councillor Hubely for sure, and myself, I was ready to vote, but not everybody was, and that's what we're here to do, right? Take our time, find out. I mean, we have 2 members that only became members yesterday. So thank you, Richard. I'm sure that lots of people will be reaching out to you. And I would suggest that you make sure that all members of council are aware too in the next few weeks. All right, let's see, what do we have left? We have application to alter 593 Laurier Avenue West, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have tied into that. This is the one at 593 Laurier Avenue West. Tied into that, we have its companion, which is the zoning bylaw amendment at the same address. All right. So we do have speakers on the items, and we're going to be dealing with the 2 of them together. We have a submission already from Brad Herbert, but Brad, you are first up. Are you here?
Just looking for him. He was here earlier. He may have left. Not here now.
He's not?
He's not.
And we do have his submission already. So Mr. Herbert was the only non-applicant speaking. So we have the applicant before us, starting with James Ireland, Murray Chown, Ryan Coolwine, Robert Martin. Who's speaking?
Madam Chair, can I just ask a question? Do we know if Mr. Herbert was speaking in support or in opposition to the staff recommendation?
The submission will be in your pack, in your deck.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know that the miracle worker can find it that quickly.
I'll go look at the submission. Thank you.
Sure, and in the meantime, we'll have there's Murray. Who's going to do a little bit of an intro here? Understanding that you are the only ones here to speak at this point. We did have some
Madam Chair, if the committee was to...
Hang on a second. Mr. Herbert is a solicitor, barrister and solicitor. It makes it easier for you to find that. He sent us an email, and a few other people did as well. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Murray.
So, Madam Chair, if the committee is inclined to deal with the reports on consent when we're the only speakers, I'm happy to defer to you. But if you'd like a brief presentation, Mr. Ireland is prepared to make that presentation, and then I'm happy to coordinate any response to questions on these applications. I will highlight before Mr. Ireland starts that this proposal was received with great accolades at Built Heritage Subcommittee a couple of weeks ago, with support from the councillor, the support from the Community Association, and support from Heritage Ottawa. So in your hands, Madam Chair, but Mr. Ireland is prepared to make a presentation.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? Let's start with that. Will anyone have any questions on this file? As Councillor McKenney was here at the beginning of the meeting, and we were talking about how important this site is absolutely to the city, and the history, the length of time it's taken us to get to today to have this recommendation. Does anyone have any questions, or are you prepared to vote in favor of or to vote? I don't have to tell you which way to vote. So Murray, if no one has any, Councillor Lieber does.
Yeah, thanks. Ryan, are you absolutely committed to those very light materials? It's obviously a really significant wraparound of the building. The lighter the materials around it, the better. Are you absolutely committed to that glass treatment?
Yes. We've done really careful material selections, again, given the location, the prominence of the building, and then its close proximity to the Fleck House, which is really the jewel around this entire project. And certainly the way that we've articulated the location of glazing is critical to the execution of the project.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's critical to get that one right. It's a beautiful spot, obviously, but we also know you do good work. So, okay. Thanks, Chair. I was just want to make sure. Yeah, no worries.
Okay, so we do have another question, Councillor Brockington.
Not a question. I just, for my colleagues, Madam Chair, want to say I'm a member of the Built Heritage Subcommittee, and as you noted, Councillor McKenney did show up and she praised the recommendation before the subcommittee. The proposal is very sound. It's very tricky because this is right at Bronson. For those of you who maybe not familiar with the municipal address, it's Laurier at Bronson, and there's this heritage building, and it's going to be protected, and the new building built right around it. But just all this to say, the subcommittee was pleased with the recommendation and supported it, and certainly I'll be supporting it today. Thank you.
Perfect. So Mr. Chow, Mr. Ireland, Mr. Coolwine, Mr. Martin, whether if he's here, do you need to say anything more?
I don't think we do, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you. So committee members, on the application to alter 593 Laurier Avenue West, a property designated in Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, is that item carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. And on item number 12, the zoning bylaw amendment for 593 Laurier Avenue West.
Carried.
Is carried? Thank you.
Carried.
So thank you, everybody. And listen, that's a I really like that. I mean, if you had seen the first application, I don't even know when it was. I guess it was like 2012, maybe. I'm not sure, around that time. You would see this is, I think it's quite well done, especially in the location that it is. All right, so where are we? We are thankfully finished.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Heavy day today, especially after, you know, just everything going on. And yesterday was a heavy day, and more to come. This is going to be a very big year. We now know who the teams leading the Lansdowne project are going to be, at least from the council side. And that'll be coming in the end of June, I think. So it's great that the motion passed yesterday, moving the next joint planning and ARAC meeting to September, closer to when we vote on the official plan. It gives everybody more time, whether you're Murray Chown, who's still on the screen, or you know, residents, our farmers, our aggregate people, absolutely, our folks, our Indigenous folks. I mean, it just is, it's good. It's good to have the time. I bet you when we get like 2 weeks off kind of in the summer, I hope we spend them well, but also spend time rereading all of that stuff again to get ready for the fall. So any notices of motion? None? Any other business? Thanks very much. We're adjourned, and our next meeting is on February 25th. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good long weekend.
Thank you.
That's true.
As
Thank
you know, with counselors, the best thing about long weekends, you get to catch up just a little bit.
What is the long weekend? Is it Friday or Monday?
Monday. It's
Sweet. I didn't know. That's awesome.
It's Dalton Days.
PD Day tomorrow.
Oh, fair enough.
They just postponed the March break, just announced it.
Yeah, I heard that a while ago.
To April. Yeah, April 12th.
And what is that about? I mean, how is April going to be better?
Yeah.
I don't know. Make my summer longer. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Have a good
Bye.
day.
Bye. Thanks, Melody.